It's difficult to describe the exact feel of What Remains of Edith Finch. There's a peculiar sense of calm in its quiet, dilapidated set pieces, its reserved, ethereal tone, and its sparse, poignant score. I have played countless story-driven narrative games, but few capture this specific mood with such elegance. Annapurna Interactive has a well-earned reputation for crafting cinematic, emotionally resonant experiences that echo in your thoughts long after you finish playing the game. And Edith Finch remains the studio's most refined expression of that approach. So today, we'll be peering into the strange serenity of What Remains of Edith Finch. This game wastes zero time and immediately drops us in first person to our protagonist, Edith Finch.
A lot of this isn't going to make sense to you, and I'm sorry about that. I'm just going to start at the beginning, with the house.
Edith is returning to her childhood home, which she has not been back to since she was 11 years old. One of the first things I immediately noticed about this game was its approach to minimalism. There is no on-screen UI. When you look down at this book, you just get an icon of a little book, and then it's up to you to figure out what controls to use. And I really like this. This game is more like a visual novel than a traditional video game, and I really, really enjoy that. This is something Annapurna has come to be pretty great at, and like I said in my intro, I think this might be the best they have to offer of this particular kind of game.
I lived here until I was 11, but I wasn't allowed inside half the rooms. Inside the mailbox were bills from 7 years ago, marked urgent, open immediately.
So throughout this entire game, players are guided by Edith in first person with Edith's voiceover, and parts of her narration also appear physically on screen. It's a very visual, atmospheric way to communicate exposition, and I think it's a really strong choice for this game.
In her will, my mother left me a key, but didn't tell me what it unlocked. Maybe she thought I'd know, or she thought that the mystery would be enough to bring me back.
The visual silhouette of this building is so iconic and memorable, and it lets you know that we are in for something really special. It also lets us know that we are in for something really weird. This story is definitely outside the realm of normal, and that is backed up by the fact that the next immediate thing that we see is this in the pond with this accompanying voiceover.
I asked Edie once about the dragon in the pond. She said it had killed her husband. I was 6. It seemed like an odd joke to me even then. As a child, the house made me uncomfortable in a way I couldn't put into words. Now, as a 17-year-old, I knew exactly what those words were. I was afraid of the house.
Edith crawls through the doggy door, into the garage, through to the kitchen, and we finally get our first taste of the inside of this house. Two things you'll notice immediately. There is a lot of stuff, a lot of what you might call garbage or useless trinkets, and there is a lot of books. This house is absolutely adorned with books everywhere, and that's very much by choice because this is a visual novel. And we're going to learn so much about the story here through the power of storytelling. There's a kind of somewhat meta approach with this story because it's a lot of stories within stories, as well as some really thoughtful musings on how much we choose to trust the narrators of stories that we are given. The first room that Edith looks into is a library, and you'll see that it's sealed off completely. You'll very quickly come to learn that it's not the only sealed off room in this house, but virtually every room, actually. As Edith explains, after her brother Milton went missing, her mother started sealing up all the other rooms of all of the other deceased relatives. And by this point, the family of the Finches had just become Edith, her mother, and her great-grandmother, all living together in this big empty house full of sealed off rooms. What an enticing way to start this game. I absolutely love the mystery aspect of this game. I love the feel of it. You know what it really evokes for me? I'm actually just kind of realizing this right now, is a series of unfortunate events. Small aside here, but I used to be obsessed with a series of unfortunate events. I have all of the books. I read all of them. I loved the Nickelodeon movie. I still love that movie. Did you know the entire movie was shot indoors and created some of the largest indoor sets of any film at the time? Fun fact. And the really intimate, unusual set design, and also the way that it had a lot to do with stories and books and storytelling itself. We're getting a lot of that here with Edith Finch. And there is definitely an unquestionable Lemony Snicket-ish vibe to What Remains of Edith Finch, even sort of in the title. There's sort of a poetic prose to that title. I really appreciate that for such a short story, this packs such a good punch. My playthrough for this game was just under 3 hours, but I was also really stopping to look at everything and re-examine everything and make sure I was getting as much coverage as possible for my review. You could probably finish the game in a hot 1 hour and a half, 1 hour and 45 minutes maybe. Which is another thing that I really like about Annapurna's shorter games is you get a really great story without a massive time commitment. As much as I appreciate Life is Strange and Don't Nod games and other choice-based adventures like that, etc., they do tend to take a lot of time, especially because they do tend to require 2 playthroughs. Which is why I'm also happy to bring this one to you a little bit faster in between my larger reviews, and I have a very large scale review coming up after this video. I'm happy to put this one out in the meantime because this is also a game that has really been on my mind lately. So I had to just go back to it and play it again, and now I'm so happy to bring it here to you.
After Milton disappeared, Mom sealed up all the bedrooms. Then Edie retaliated and drilled peepholes.
So before we get into learning each individual story of the Finches and their untimely demise, we get to preview each room and story through the peephole. Another extremely strong, applaudable creative choice.
Molly always seemed like a girl I could imagine being friends with, if she hadn't died in 1947. The last time I was in Edith Sr.'s room, I was 10 and she was painting my portrait. As a kid, I just assumed every house had peepholes and sealed rooms you weren't allowed inside of. My Grandpa Sam spent 7 years sharing a room with his dead brother, Calvin. Barbara was a child star for 2 years, until America grew out of it. I spent a lot of time playing in Great Uncle Walter's room. I think my mom sometimes regretted not sealing it up. Lewis told me there were secret passages, but I never believed him.
Secret passages and unusual architecture are a huge part of this game, and they lend themselves really well to the linear nature of the game. Secret passages were also a huge part of Gone Home, another Annapurna game that I will absolutely be covering. What Remains of Edith Finch feels like a bit of a spiritual successor to Gone Home. It takes a lot of those same elements, and then it embellishes on them even more.
But I had no idea what was behind that door. Just like I had no idea where all this was gonna lead.
So the first story that we're treated to here is Molly's, and this one is one of my favorites. Right out of the gate, Annapurna proves the power of its approach in stories within stories. And Molly's story is told through her own journal.
December 13th, 1947. Dear Diary, I'll be gone soon, but I wanted to tell somebody about what's gonna happen.
So as players read Molly's diary, we're thrown into Molly's POV, and we immediately get the sense that we don't know if we can trust this narrator or not. In her journal, Molly writes that because she was sent to bed without dinner, she starts eating her gerbils food, berries from a holiday decoration, and toothpaste. Hashtag girl dinner. I think this is actually the moment I officially fell in love with this game, because I was like, oh, okay, this game's fucking weird. This game's bizarre. I love it because it's so strange and it's so creepy. The voice acting in this is exceptional, and this girl who's voiced by an actual child, and if you're familiar with my channel, you know that I absolutely hate when adults do child voices in video games, because not only does it sound insincere, but it sounds like cringeworthy comedy, and it's not supposed to. This is the opposite of that.
Then I heard chirping outside my window. It was a barn swallow going back to her nest. I reached out for her. And suddenly, I was a cat.
This actor is pitch perfect, and the way that children have imaginations that can seep into their concept of reality not only makes for a completely unreliable narrator, but makes for a fascinating story that can go above and beyond the constraints of reality. This is a recurring theme within the game, that the stories that we tell sometimes become larger than life, whether it's by design or incidental. And that's why this is one of my favorite stories, because it's our first one, and it immediately lays the groundwork for what we can expect with the Finches and the stories of their bizarre and fascinating deaths.
I gobbled her up. And suddenly, I was an owl. First, all I heard was the wind. Then I heard little teeth nibbling in the grass.
Ooh, the music, the visuals, the atmosphere for this part where we are the barn owl is so good. It's so on point. And it has that sort of ethereal feeling of calm, almost of Serenity. Even though this is such a chaotic journal entry from a child, and we don't know what to make of this. Is this a dream that she's having? Is this just her making up a fun story to amuse herself because she's feeling bad about the fact that she essentially got punished? Is this something she really thinks is happening in her head? It's very unclear, but it's so cool to be a part of it and to not question it too much. After all, this is the journal entry of a very small child. And the writers did some high-key creative things with that. First, she eats a bunch of garbage in her room. Typical child stuff. Then she turns into a cat. Then she turns into a barn owl. And then she's a deep sea creature looking for her next meal. I absolutely love that part.
Now I was a monster, and I smelled people everywhere. I slithered onto the sand, and the good smell went into an old pipe. All of my stomach started growling. And suddenly, I was me again. I held my breath for a long time, but I couldn't hear anything. I think it's waiting for me to fall asleep. But it's not going to wait much longer. It needs to feed, and we both know I will be delicious.
That line read legitimately gives me goosebumps every time. It got me so good the first time I played this game. What a fucking stellar ending to that story. What to fucking make of it? So this is how she died. What does that mean? My first initial thought is maybe she jumped out her window and fell. But we don't know. I mean, she wrote this entire story. Maybe she ate all that stuff and she died of food poisoning. Who knows? This is what's so cool and fascinating about all these deaths is they're highly open for interpretation and we don't get a lot of answers. So it gives the player a lot to think about. And I love that there's mystery, but there is also an answer in a way. What is true is that we know that she died very young, and she, like many other members of the family, had a very fantastical mind. Just like her mother, Edie, whose room is the one that we visit next.
I spent a lot of time in Great-Grandma Edie's room. We got along, and it was a good place to hide from my mom. Louis died a week before we left, but Edie had already started to memorialize him. When Edie told people Sven was killed by a dragon, she could also have said he was building a dragon-shaped slide that collapsed. She could have, but she didn't.
Something I'm realizing now, too, is Edie's room is the only one that we visit where we don't immediately get the story of how they died, and there's a reason for that. We will come back to that. Next, we visit this hideously and grossly decorated pink washroom with a shag carpet. I cannot fucking imagine doing bathroom stuff with a giant fuzzy pink shag carpet. I could only imagine the smell of that place. Oh my god. Also, in this playthrough, I noticed this poster for Mount Rainier, which immediately made me think of Life is Strange 2 because they visit a national park in Mount Rainier.
Her room was like a museum.
There's also a really clever moment of exposition here through a stereoscopic adventure that tells us more about the history of the Finches and their tragedy.
Odin Finch buries the latest victims of the family curse, his wife Ingeborg and their newborn son. On January 7th, 1937, he set sail with his family and his house, hoping to leave the curse behind. But 40-foot waves off the coast of Washington send the house and Odin to the bottom of the sea. Odin Finch is the first to be buried in the new family cemetery. His daughter Edie is already dreaming of a new Finch house. Whatever's wrong with this family, it goes back a long ways. There's a secret in this bathroom. It's in the last place you would look. It isn't in the cupboard. It's hidden in this book.
We are then led through another secret passage which brings us to Sam and Calvin's room. Sam and Calvin are twins, and their room is literally split right down the middle.
I knew Grandpa Sam had a twin, and that he never talked about him. I guess my grandpa didn't like history any more than my mom did.
How I Want to Remember My Brother by Sam Finch. The thing I remember is that when he made up his mind, that was it.
The story of Calvin's death draws from one of the most quintessential North American childhood memories, as well as fantasies. In this sequence, we play as Calvin, who's trying to go as high as possible on the swings, but it's more than that. He doesn't just want to go high, he wants to go all the way around.
But that day, he finally made up his mind to do it.
If you ever used a swing as a kid, I'm thinking there's a pretty damn high chance you did. This was either very likely a fantasy or a fear of yours. And the one piece of media this immediately makes me think of, tell me if your brain's already going here too. It depends. Probably more so if you're a millennial, is a very specific episode of Disney's Recess where one of the characters wants to go all of the way around. And one of the characters actually thinks they see them go all the way around and disappear. And in a very eerily similar way, that's what happens here. Calvin goes all the way around and then he disappears.
The day he made up his mind to fly. And he did.
Calvin's story felt strangely familiar. When I was younger, I remember trying to do the exact same thing.
There is a really somber nature to this one, especially because the letter explaining his death is written by his twin brother. There's such a strong emotional resonance in how these stories are told. This game, for such a short game, it packs a motherfucker of a punch. And me right now kind of coming off of going through the entire Life is Strange franchise, it really makes me think I would fucking kill to see Annapurna tackle that franchise. And it also kind of makes me wonder if maybe what the Life is Strange franchise would benefit from right now is shorter stories. Makes me wonder what else Square Enix could do with the Life is Strange franchise. And it really makes me think maybe it's time for them to just try and shift formula.
Growing up, I always thought of Barbara as a child star. I never thought about how hard it must have been for her afterwards.
Barbara's story is perhaps the most high-key creative novel approach to telling the story of their death, as well as how it cleverly draws from pop culture, considering the fact that Barbara grew up as a child star. Her entire story is represented through a comic book that we essentially jump into and move around in panel by panel.
Old Jack here with another ghastly tale inspired by America's most unfortunate family. I'm calling it The Surprise Ending of Barbara Finch. As a child star, Barbara was famous for her scream. Now at 16, she was all washed up. A has-been.
Really cool, really creative, and also with a character heavily inspired by the Crypt Keeper right down to the voice, narrating us through this pulpy, horror-style story. We learn that after Barbara's failed success at staying in Hollywood, she led something of a ho-hum life, though she always wanted more. She became a waitress, but she always yearned to be back in the limelight. And this is a very dark take on the idea of a character wanting something so bad that they manifest it in the most punishingly real way. Although, of course, none of this is real, as the circumstances of Barbara's death, just like the rest in this game, remain a total mystery. This comic book seems to suggest that Barbara was actually killed by the kind of horror creatures that she faced in those early Hollywood films. What this really means, we don't know. Maybe a real murderer did break into her house. Maybe the boyfriend in this comic book did it. Maybe she died under completely different circumstances. And hearing Barbara's story through a comic book made by a third party makes this one of the most elusive deaths in Edith Finch.
Then she saw what kind of monsters they were, and she realized what was about to happen. She was going to be famous. And with her final breath, Barbara Finch gave the performance of her life. Poor girl. She had a taste for stardom. But unfortunately, so did her fans. Of course, the police blamed it all on poor Rick, who disappeared the same night. And little Walter? Hiding under his bed the whole time. He took it all pretty hard, but that's another story. As for Barbara, tucked inside the music box is all they ever found of her. Her ear. Now that's what I call a real eerie tale.
Edie told me all Barbara wanted was to be remembered, as absurd as that comic was. Maybe what Edie saw was a happy ending. I guess now I know why Mom didn't like me playing with the music box.
And with that, players are cued to go down into the basement now that they can successfully retrieve the basement key.
I saw Edie sneak down to the basement once, carrying packages. I thought maybe she was hiding presents. It turned out she was hiding a lot more than that.
And this leads us to, in my opinion, one of the wildest revelations of this story, which is that Walter, who as a child witnessed the disappearance/death of his older sister Barbara, had been living as a recluse downstairs in a bunker this entire time. Just when you thought the story couldn't get any stranger, turns out amongst all the family members who went missing and did die, one who they just assumed was missing for a long ass time came down here to get away from everything, presumably after the extreme trauma of whatever happened to Barbara, and just lived out decades doing nothing but listening to the radio, eating canned peaches, and hearing the train go by every day. There's a really great bit here where he talks about hearing this monster on the other side of the door and how it used to drive him crazy, but eventually became this feeling of comfort. And in playing it back this time, I'm realizing that as far as I can interpret it, he's really talking about the sounds of the train and how it's sort of slowly driven him crazy over the years, because as he continued to disassociate more and more from reality, hearing something on the other side of the door where he will never go stops becoming something real like a train and starts becoming something surreal like a monster. And don't forget, in that story that we just saw, Barbara was killed by monsters. There's a beautifully heartbreaking element to this one, and it really speaks to the nature of trauma and generational trauma, which is totally a theme in this game, but it's really specific with how Walter's story is told. And there's a real poignancy to how it ends, because after all of these decades of hiding away, maybe trying not to deal with things, completely taking himself out of reality, he decides that he finally wants to participate in the real world. So he finally finds his way out, and he's talking about being excited for the idea of finally being a part of the real world and seeing the sun. But then we see that he's actually walking out of these train tracks, and
I can already imagine the sun on my face.
yeah.
Walter died when I was 6. I can't believe my mom never told me he was down here. I'm sure my mom was trying to protect me. But if she never told me about an uncle under the house, I can only imagine what else she was hiding. I don't want to make the same mistakes she made, trying to bury something that's still alive. Now that there's only one of us left, or maybe 2, I thought it was time I heard the stories for myself and found out what happened to everyone else. But now I'm worried the stories themselves might be the problem. Maybe we believed so much in a family curse, we made it real.
And now we are treated to another one of those oddly serene vistas. Staring out at the old house from across the water. As we know, Odin died trying to bring this house out to America, and seeing its ghoulish silhouette in the moonlight is a fantastic visual representation of the kind of tragedy that has stalked this family. As Edith said earlier, none of them ever got too far from the house, and the original house that Sven died in never lingered too far from any future Finches. That is some fucking great storytelling, right?
Maybe it'd be better if all this just died with me. But I thought you should know about your family. Though to be honest, I feel as lost as you probably do right now. I think the people in these stories believed them, for what that's worth. And when you look at the house, that history of imagination and stubbornness and madness, any of it seems possible.
Edith then winds her way through the cemetery and memorial, and this is one of my favorite set pieces. It is so beautiful and haunting, and one might see this as quite macabre, but Edie's sensibilities inspired her to create these beautiful pieces that each represents that person and who they were. This also makes a lot of sense because Edie is one of the storytellers that propagated these stories, this sort of mythologized version of the Finch's tragedies. And no monument better represents this than the one of the sinking house, with Odin standing atop of it as his family back on shore reaches out to him, never to see him again. There's this kind of great plausibility in the mythology of the Finches. Certainly the utterly mysterious circumstances of all their deaths is a lot less likely, but this genesis of a family that had this initial tragedy that no one could really let go of or get past, and then it's sort of just influencing future deaths. It kind of reminds me of the Lee family and how Bruce Lee died at the age of 27, and then his son Brandon Lee also died at the age 27 on the set of The Crow, and it has led the family to believe that there is this Lee family curse, that the men in the family all die by 27. But of course, the simple truth of it is sometimes tragedy just happens, and we as humans have a proclivity for trying to make sense of that. And I think what's so powerful about the storytelling in Edith Finch is that whether we have a hard known reason why someone passed away or their mysterious circumstances lead us to make up stories in our head, nothing can ever fully satiate that ache of losing somebody. And while there is certainly utility in creating a story around their death, especially when the nature of their death has so few answers, it can often lead towards this predilection towards a certain removal from facing that grief. Do you know what I mean?
We never found Milton's body, so my mom insisted we were putting up a monument, not a tombstone.
We've now reached the part of the game where we're starting to explore Edith's immediate family. That is her siblings and her mother. And this is where we start getting into the more fantasy-like architecture that we see, with the house having extra parts built onto it and then built on over that, as well as this quiet revelation that adds a whole layer to this story.
If she told me there was going to be so much climbing, I never would have come when I was 22 weeks pregnant. I never met Grandpa Sam, but I think he and my mom had a lot in common. They were both pretty intense.
Sam, who was a reclusive photographer and hunter, has his story told through a series of photos that the player has to find the focus for and then snap.
Memories are going to last a lifetime. Perfect.
Am I gonna have to shoot anything? It's gonna rain the whole weekend, isn't it?
Just like all of the other stories that we get in this game, the method of learning the story is pretty inventive, and I really enjoy it. What I also like about this death is it kind of sneaks up on you in a surprising way, because you see what happens is Sam was thrown off a cliff by a deer, but it doesn't happen until you snap the exact photo. So in this moment, it actually kind of makes it feel like you, the player, are pulling the trigger. It's a really unexpected little gut punch and a great way to end the story.
Dad, it's twitching. I think
That's
it's
totally normal, Doc. Just focus on the camera. Try not to think about...
Dad!
Of all these stories, that's the one I wish most that my mom had told me. After Sam died, my mom and Edie got really close. They'd both lost a lot. I can't imagine my mom ever writing poetry, and yet...
A poem for Gus, who always said the wedding was a bad idea. Our father never hit us kids, at least not very hard, before the day my brother said with teenage disregard that he'd be dead before he'd see a wedding in our yard.
Gus's death is told through a poem by his sister Dawn, who is Edith's mother. And in this poem, she recounts how Gus, who objected to his father's wedding, spent the whole day flying his kite and ignoring everybody else. So players have to fly the kite, and really creatively, we have to actually fly the kite through the words of poetry to put the story together. So as the wedding is going on, the weather starts to get worse and worse, and unfortunately, because this family is cursed as fuck, it begins to get really, really windy, and it begins to storm, but Gus simply refuses to come in. And we see more of that characteristic Finch stubbornness. And in talking about this family curse, one could say that stubbornness is also a recurring theme in how some of these things happen. A certain unwillingness to, one might say, accept reality or diverge from that individual Finch's plan, often to their own detriment.
I wish that I could truly say I thought about you on that day. Out there on the beach alone, just you, the wind, the sea, and foam. But I didn't. Until we found you. She never talked about him, but Mom told me once if I was a boy, they were going to name me Gus.
Dear Kay, do you remember the way Gregory used to laugh when he thought he was alone? Like something funny was happening, but only he could see it. I think he saw things the rest of us don't.
So in this story, we play as Gregory, who is an infant. And if you've been paying attention, you probably know where this is going. This is absolutely one of the more morbid moments of an already fairly morbid game, and I think one of the more talked about ones too, because there is a certain level of shock value to this one that I do think for some people transcends the others, because you are playing as an infant, but there's nothing you can do to stop this from happening. Quite in fact, you have to use the controls to make this death happen. In Gregory's mind, he's controlling all his little toys in the bathtub, including the jumping frog. So, as his mother is on the phone with her ex-husband, Sam, and they are having some kind of a tiff, some kind of an argument, Gregory uses his quote unquote powers to make the frog turn the tap back on. And even though his mother had already started emptying the tub, he uses his powers, or should I say you, the player, turns it back on and refills the tub. I definitely know that I felt unsettled with this one, but also was just floored by, how many deaths are we into this game? And each one finds a new surprising way to do something shocking, unexpected, and gutting. Even though we know the second we start every story, it's going to result in the person's death. And unlike some of the other Finch's deaths, this one is pretty literal and concrete. We know what happened. We know that his mother started draining the tub, and then he refilled the tub and he drowned by accident. But the way that his father presents this event in the letter that he writes to his ex-wife in their divorce proceedings, where he's talking about how he was always uneasy that Gregory was such a happy child. And part of that is because the whole family is so sucked up in believing this curse that even with the child being an infant, the dad is like, maybe this isn't a good thing. This could totally go all wrong. He's too checked out of reality already. And I guess one could argue that they were right, but at the same time, the child was an infant. This was a true accident. And when I really think about this death, this is one of those ones that makes you go, is it a family curse, or is it simply that when some of these things happen, the family needs to attribute this totally unfair, inexplicable tragedy to something? It's a child accidentally drowning in a bathtub, and it's nobody's fault. So what can you do about it? Perhaps you attribute it to an ancient family curse. I mean, what else can you do?
I'm sure he's happy. And he'd want you to be happy too. Good luck, Kay. Love, Sam.
My mom moved to India a week after graduation and got a job teaching English. Louis was born a year later. When my dad died, I don't think Mom knew where else to go. I'm sure Edie was happy to have her back. And to see kids in the house again. The house had to get a little bigger, but Edie was used to that. And for a while, things were good. Almost normal. But it didn't last. The beginning of the end was Milton's 10th birthday, when Edie gave him a castle. After Milton disappeared, the only thing he left behind was a room full of paintings.
Now, Milton's death is the only one that we truly get zero answers or hints on. Quite in fact, the story makes a point of saying that he was never confirmed dead, rather that he just went missing. And we don't get any kind of large creative story that might lend itself towards giving us some hints of what may or may not have happened. Instead, we just get to go through his art flipbook and see that he was a very talented, creative young individual, and that's all we know. He was a storyteller, like many other members of the family. Where he went and what happened to him is up for debate. I'm sure there's a ton of theories online. I'm not too particularly interested in that, though, because don't get me wrong, theorizing about those kind of things is certainly fun and can also make for great content. But my personal reading of this kind of thing is there really is no answer. It's not like the developers actually snuck in what happened to him and you have to solve it. That's not really the point of this kind of story. And also that's why I didn't find myself exactly taken or really inspired by some theory videos that I watched online in preparation for this review. Whenever I do a review of something like this, I like to go on YouTube and see what other people have said, look at some Easter egg videos, some theory videos. There's an incredibly popular Matt Pat video talking about how the curse isn't really a curse, and I don't know, maybe Edie did it or something. I'm not gonna lie, I didn't get very too far into it because it had this sort of, no offense to Matt Pat, but it had this kind of like lame populist approach that I don't personally vibe with because this is such a cool individual story. And do you ever feel like sometimes when you get a really great unique story on this where concrete answers are so far from the point when people make a YouTube video that's like, actually, Edie did all of it and she is a concrete murderer. No fantasy or mystery here. Don't you sometimes feel like that totally just sucks the fucking fun out of this shit? A 40-minute video trying really hard to aggressively explain an intentionally inexplicable story. Just take all of the fantasy, suck that out, and turn it into some kind of fucking 3-part Netflix docuseries about what really happened to the Finches. Me, personally, I'll pass on that.
Mom definitely blamed Edie, but I think Louis blamed himself. After he graduated, he just spent more and more time in his room. Until Mom got him a job at the cannery. Louis's room smelled very, very familiar. That part of him lived on.
Dear Mrs. Finch, as Louis's psychiatrist, I can understand your desire for an explanation. As I see it, the trouble began in January, shortly after we convinced your son to seek treatment for substance abuse. Newly sober, I believe Louis first noticed the monotony of his daily life.
For Louis's segment, players must act as Louis at the cannery, chopping fish heads, and as you chop the fish heads with your right controller, you use your left stick to take on Louis's inner imagination, where he goes into this enchanted, fantastical world that he uses to escape. It's a neat little tiny challenge because you're basically doing one kind of directional movement with the left stick and a different kind of directional movement with the right stick. You can forego chopping the fish heads. I remember I tried this in one of my gameplays, but then eventually so many fish will fill up the screen that you won't be able to know what you're doing on the left. This is one of the more involved stories because it goes on for quite a while, so for the sake of time, I have cut it down. But I do want to say that in playing this, I find it incredibly reminiscent of Pan's Labyrinth. Without spoiling too much of that film, but you should definitely go watch that film. I think it's one of the greatest films of all time. There is an ending to it that resembles this kind of moving beyond reality in a way that we may not completely understand, but we know the final result of. So in this version, Lewis became so removed from reality that he believed his own fantasy world was real, and he rejected reality and put his head under the fish guillotine and I guess beheaded himself. Either that or gave himself a serious laceration that was fatal. This one is absolutely brutal and also one of the most effective in showing how the Finches have this history of removing themselves so far from reality to cope that they end up becoming fantasy stories themselves.
There was only one thing left to do. And the rest I think you know. Mrs. Finch, your son was a kind man who will be missed by all of us who knew him.
My brother was really cool. I wish you could have met him. On the way back from Lewis's funeral, my mom told me to start packing. She waited until the day before we left to tell Edie. I'm not sure if she wanted to make it easier or harder.
And now finally we enter the top room, which is where Edith stayed with her mother. And as we go all the way up, we enter Edith's room herself, where she sits down and writes the very end of her story, starting with what happened on that final night before they left. And this is where we're also going to get to learn a little bit more about Great-Grandma Edie.
That whole last day, Edie just watched us pack and didn't say a word. Until supper, when she raised her glass and said,
"To our final night together, and all our final nights apart."
Grandma, you know what I said about alcohol. Some of your medications are very
Edith,
specific.
I left a present for you in the hallway. Why don't you go open it? The grown-ups have to argue now. That thing you're afraid of isn't going to end when you leave the house. Edith has a right to know these stories.
My children are dead because of your stories.
Now, this to me is one of the most important lines in the game because there's so much that we can take from this. Dawn saying that her children are dead because of Edie's stories suggests that the family's mythologizing of all this tragedy has had this generational trauma sort of drip down and take effect, and that maybe Dawn's children grew up believing that they were not longed for this world. I certainly see the effects of that in Lewis's death. I can't really speak for the rest, but I think this line is where a lot of that theorizing can come from. But at the end of the day, it's not just Edie's stories, although she is the one who created the memorials and the paintings and did preserve these stories. In this part, we also get to see Edie's writing to Edith, talking about the night that she was born and how there was a very low tide, so Edie walked all the way back to the old house.
I've seen that house every day of my life. But I never thought I'd go back to it.
I love how mysterious and eerie and unknowable this scene feels. The idea of walking back to the dilapidated house where her father also died. This house that they'd been looking at for their entire lives, swept out to sea but never going that far, finally going back to it in the middle of the night through all this fog on this very auspicious night that Edith herself was also born. This is a part of Edith's story that she herself never knew. And perhaps it's not real, perhaps it's just nonsense, perhaps this is just another one of Edie's stories that she's telling. And in a way, I can see how Dawn might be trying to protect her daughter from hearing one of these stories, although I don't necessarily find harm in this one. To me, it just reads as Edie passing down this idea of who the Finches are, and also mythologizing a little bit of Edith's story, but not in a very harmful way, not in a way that makes it sound like she's set up for death.
Things I can't explain, but that I need you to try and...
Edith, what are you doing in here?
It's mine.
Edith!
Mom, you're gonna rip it. Let go!
Either way, Dawn comes in, rips the book away from her, and they leave that night. And we learn that this would also be the last night of Edie's life.
I never saw Great-Grandma Edie again. The next morning, the van came to pick her up, but she was already gone. After that, we moved around a lot. We both tried to make the best of it. My mom didn't like to talk about it, but she started getting sick a lot. She got better for a while, and then she didn't. And then I was alone. The last Finch left alive. Until I found out about you. I'm still not sure what to tell you about all this. If we lived forever, maybe we'd have time to understand things. But as it is, I think the best we can do is try to open our eyes. And appreciate how strange and brief all of this is. This journal was supposed to be for you. But now I hope you'll never see it. I just want to meet you. And tell you all these stories myself. But I guess if you're reading this now, things didn't work out that way. This is where your story begins. I'm sorry I won't be there to see it. It's a lot to ask, but I don't want you to be sad that I'm gone. I want you to be amazed that any of us ever had a chance to be here at all. Good luck.
In a landscape crowded with oversaturated AAA titles, relentless live service games, creatively bankrupt cash grabs, and hollow franchise installments, What Remains of Edith Finch stands out as a reminder of what this medium can be at its best. It's not just a testament to the power of storytelling and interactive design. It's a celebration of the artistry that small, focused studios can bring when they understand their craft on a fundamental level. There's a subtle timelessness to this game, not only in its narrative, but in its presentation, its art direction, and its thoughtful, human approach. And as modern games increasingly fall into the traps of fleeting trends, style over substance aesthetics, and safe, digestible narratives, Edith Finch remains proof that sincerity, imagination, and intention will always outshine convention. Thank you so much for joining me in this review and playthrough of What Remains of Edith Finch. This has been one of my favorite short games for a really long time, and I am so happy to see that viewers and subscribers have been requesting it, because had they not, I probably wouldn't have initially thought to bring this one forward and make a video of it. So again, thank you. Thank you for your support. Thank you so much for your suggestions. I recently asked on my channel if anybody had any other short, cozy, or story-driven games they wanted to suggest me, and I was treated to a wealth of responses. I think I have at least 8 new games in my wish list that I plan on bringing to you one day. My next video is going to be a really big one, and I'm not going to say what it is right now, but I will say that it is at the top list of game series that have been suggested to me. It is also an episodic series. If you know my channel, you probably know exactly what I'm talking about, but until then, I hope you have some fun, I hope you get some rest, and I will see you all very soon.